Welcome to the Developing Life Podcast.
So to start, we'll reiterate why we're doing this. This roundtable conversation is a new thing for us. So apologize in advance for the bumpiness, if there are any bumpy parts, but this is what makes us truly special as people, our ability to connect with each other, to examine diverse perspectives, to empathize, to examine problems and come up with powerful, meaningful solutions. It's what connects us as people, but it's also what makes us very valuable in business. So we want to come together, be patient with each other, be thoughtful, be considerate, and just really, really appreciate the diverse backgrounds that we're bringing together. The reason that we're here today, Eric reached out to me after, I believe it was Mark's episode that we had. You two have worked in harmony with each other in the past. So as we jump in, I would love to start out by introducing everyone, and then we would jump into your all's story. Okay, so today's roundtable unites Brian Stancheski, the eco-conscious creative. He's been on our podcast as a guest before. Father living in New York, who's been inspired by music, the arts, and wanting to build a better world for his son. Serena, who we've just met. Let's just go around. Let's introduce yourselves. It might be nice. Let's just go around and do like a 30-second introduction, who you are, your background, and then we'll hop into Eric and Mark's story. Okay, and let's start with, so we'll go from the bottom. Rachel, since you're all warmed up, let's go ahead and start with you, and then we'll work our way up. Okay.
Wait, me? Or the
just go ahead and introduce yourself. Just a quick introduction, your background. I know that you just did it a few seconds ago before we went live, but just to catch everyone up. Yeah.
Okay, no, I was just checking because I saw there's also a lot in here. So I'm Rachel Celanese. I've been a climate designer and chapter leader here in LA for the last 4 years, since literally right at the very beginning of the pandemic, March 2020. And for my entire professional career, I've been in entertainment, designing movie posters, campaigns for TV, streaming, lots of hip hop albums back in the day that Brian and I talked about during Project Blue Sky. And yeah, I think always wanting to be involved in climate and doing good in the world. I'm now trying to align the values that I have with the skills that I've developed.
Awesome. Brian, I'll unmute you and I'll let you speak on your behalf as well really quickly. Just introduce yourself.
My name is Brian Stancheski. I'm hailing from the great borough of Brooklyn. I as well have been a climate designer for about 4 years now, since about 2020. I am also a climate leader for the New York City chapters, and I focus mainly, my background's in marketing and PR agencies, and I'm now trying to pave a better world for my son and all the next youth or the next generation so that we have something to brand in the future.
Awesome. Thank you so much. All right, Serena.
Hi, I'm Serena, and I am currently at home in Spain, but I have been living for the past 25 years in Miami, and I'm sort of like fighting that fight in Florida. I have been involved in some sort of sustainability, conscious capitalism, climate, with my own branding agency for the past 7 years when I certified as a B Corporation. Previous to that, I was an art director for luxury publications. So really, in the thick of the why we're in this problem, I feel like, conning people to buying crap that they don't need is terrible for the planet. So here I am with y'all making up for that.
Yeah, super excited to have you. To introduce the developing team, you'll see True and Heather alongside us. We are not sustainability leaders. We are not as knowledgeable as the 5 others that have joined us today, but we are here to challenge their thinking and just to give our perspective as individuals who are just kind of new, but very interested in delving into the industry. We'll give the floor now to Eric and Mark. They are here because their unique perspectives are they're so contrasting, but there's a beautiful harmony in them as well. Mark is a punk inspired, action forward designer, creative facilitator, strategist, and speaker. Eric is an educator, project leader. He's a leader in design for responsible innovation. But you all have worked together before, and as part of climate designers, you're part of this huge movement that kind of finds the beautiful unity in these two principles. So, Mark, I'll give the floor to you. I'll let you introduce yourself, then we'll move over to Eric, and then I would love to get into the harmony of your story.
Sure, yeah. So, hey everyone, my name is Mark. I live in San Francisco. Since 2009, I've been a designer, creative facilitator, and strategist working on a variety of social impact projects, many of which I started myself. I've collaborated with local communities, nonprofits, various organizations, implementing solutions and ventures within a wide range of areas such as technology, public education, health, economic development. And in 2016, actually 2015, I had what I call a climate epiphany. And the year after that, 2016, I started a creative studio working with climate-focused organizations, basically projects at the intersection of design, brand, and content strategy. I've been helping climate organizations since then achieve business goals, brand expression, and human engagement. And fast forward to 2019, my then business partner and I, we co-founded a global organization. Now it's a global organization called Climate Designers, which many of us here on the panel are involved in some form or another. And we are a global community of designers across every industry committed to climate action. And I also teach part-time. I teach at California College of the Arts. I actually teach a class called Climate Designers, where I am able to bring what I'm learning in my professional world into the classroom to help graduate climate designers. That's it. And Devron, thanks for having me back.
Yeah, of course. Thanks for joining us. All right, and over to you, Eric.
Hi, everybody. I'm Eric Benson, and currently my job title is that I'm the Associate Professor and Chair of Graphic Design and Design for Responsible Innovation at the University of Illinois. But that's sort of not the climate story that I think everyone's interested in, because it took a long time for me to get to this particular spot in my life in terms of being an educator. And to go back just a number of years might date myself and reveal my age. But in 2003, I was lucky enough to attend the Power of Design conference put on by the AIGA in Vancouver, up in Canada. And it was put on by Terry Irwin and her team. That was, as Mark said, a climate epiphany for me. And that was when I had transitioned into more digital work, thinking I was washing my hands of any sort of negativity in terms of what I was doing in the world. Found out that was totally wrong. And that changed my perspective on what I was doing and why I was doing it. I went back to work, and my idea was to bring that sustainability ethos into a very large Fortune 50 corporation where I was working at the time. I won't name it, but it was not met with much success or support. That's when I realized I needed to change and also learn a lot more. I wasn't ready to bring this to the big stage. So I went to graduate school, and that's what helped me create my nonprofit, Renourish. Do not go to the website currently. PHP has taken it down, sadly, but that led me into becoming an educator. My thoughts there was simply, if I'm going to make an impact, it's going to be here in education. I'll be meeting, I don't know how many countless people every semester versus the same few working at a company. And that's not to slight anyone working at a company. We need people within that system activating climate action wherever you are. So Yeah, so being an educator is one that I never thought I would find myself in. Speaking earlier about introverts, that's me. And so standing in front of 30 students at times, right, can be a little daunting and tiring for someone who prefers not to be in front of people. So, but I know that it's important, and so I continue to do it. And I'm excited to talk with everyone today about what we can still do, because there's a lot to do.
Yeah, definitely. I love that. And I've not considered that perspective before, but yes, continually preparing a cycle of creatives is so powerful. And it kind of brings us to why we're here today, because in your line of work, Eric, you know that there's always going to be someone that's there as a day one student. There's going to be someone who is completely new to this world, who needs support, who needs guidance, who needs connection. And that's why we're here today. There are three reasons. I think, Serena, in your profile, you have this very powerful quote. It says that everything we create, use, buy makes a statement about where we stand. And that's so true. I think that's something that we're all becoming more cognizant of as we move forward. We all want to do better, but there are some barriers that exist that make it extremely hard. I know that personally, in the past, I felt like it's very difficult for me as one individual to make a difference. When I look at the experience that's in this group, it is intimidating. You know, it makes me think that I would have to dedicate a lifetime to doing what you do to be half as good as you all are. So that's what we want to explore today. You know, we're all at different points in this journey. I would love to examine the barriers that have kind of been standing in the way from that. I think Chris Do has been branding it as that step zero. You know, sometimes we examine a problem as if we're already active and involved in it or have some awareness, but from a we're just now interested perspective, you know, so as educators, as individuals experienced in this industry, or you know, true Heather, what are the barriers that you all have encountered throughout your experience that seem to be, I guess, the biggest troublemakers that we can kind of delve into today?
So, one thing I think about an awful lot is, let's say, like we could take something like recycling. Only a certain percentage of what I recycle actually is recycled. And I'm putting all this energy and effort into doing something because it's the only thing I feel like I can do with some of these products. And even if I'm using my dollar to voice what I prefer, um, there's still a level of, I still feel sort of helpless. Like I don't have the power to dictate at the highest level the types of materials that are being created. So I'd love to hear people's opinion on how do you deal with that? Like that feeling of helplessness, like this is all that's accessible to me right now. And I know that it's not really helping, but that's all I can do. So I would love anybody's opinion about that.
I definitely echo with that same feeling of lack of resources and accessibility to make an impact that actually matters. And you're right. Like, I think the things that we do, I don't know, I feel like I'm in this mentality that it's just so small that it's not going to make a difference. And for that, I would like a little bit of direction and clarity. And I'm actually really excited to hear, Eric, when you mentioned that you thought initially your digital approach to design, kind of cleared you of some things, and then you found out that that was not the case. I'm really interested to find out exactly what you actually learned about that, because that's exactly how I show up in this space. And I would not have known at all that, the things that I was doing, even though it was virtual, that it still was making some kind of impact that could possibly be negative. And if I know that, I would like to remedy that. So I'm really interested in that conversation.
Sure, I can jump right into that and address Heather's as well. I guess I think watching The Inconvenient Truth was a really big moment as well for me, even though it was like a couple years later than 2003. I think it was 2006, I'm going to say, when it came out. But just the idea of learning about greenhouse gas emissions that come from manufacturing, come from hosting any sort of digital media, whether it be streaming or not streaming. And then in addition to that, right, in school, I actually I started out as a product designer. I was doing products and furniture and thinking through the idea of digital, right? It still required things to be manufactured, right? Whether it be a laptop or a desktop or anything involved in creating something digital. So I realized there's just no way around escaping that carbon footprint as long as we are using fossil fuels as our energy source. And so that's my answer to that, Drew. And to address the other question, and I know that Mark also has experienced this because it comes from talking with climate justice and climate scientists, whether it be on my podcast or through these different climate designer events that have happened over the years, that this is a question that has been asked to these folks. And I myself have asked them, right? And it gets into this climate anxiety and climate grief is what I'm doing matters. And there's been some really interesting answers from that. And one of them was, well, if you do nothing, who wins? Right? It's the same people who are winning right now. So it's better to do something. Does it matter? Everything matters, right? Everything has some level of impact, small or big, but the more people who do those little things, they continue to add up and that becomes a movement, right? So that was an answer I hear a lot. Another one that I hear, and I guess I'll reference being an introvert again, right? Like I feel guilty not being in the streets, protesting like Greta and a long list of other people and Extinction Rebellion and all of these groups. And so that makes me feel like I'm not doing enough or that I'm, basically not doing the right stuff. I had don't want to give away the bag here, but the next guest on Climify, Gobi Nasik, had an amazing answer to that question. So I'm sure by the time that episode this comes out, Kobe's would have come out. So I'll say it here. If you don't want to be arrested in the streets, maybe be there when they get out of jail with food, water, help them charge their phone, be there with a blanket. There are a lot of things you can still do when they are protesting. You can bring food to them. You can do the things that are still necessary to help that movement grow and support those folks. So in your job, I know Mark can talk a lot about this with drawdown.org's every job is a climate job, or every designer is a climate designer, right? Like bringing that ethos into where you are is still doing something.
Love that. And yeah, Mark, would you like to speak maybe a little to that, especially along the lines of something I've been questioning here lately on the subject of sustainability versus regenerative? You know, the earth is self-healing. If we would all just leave it alone, eventually it would, it would be in so much of a better shape than it is now. So is it more important that we focus on regenerative practices? And do you think that it breaks down a barrier to show people the things that they're doing in daily life that are already contributing to a better world? Do you think that that's a nice way to ease them kind of into this journey?
Yeah, I think it's a both and, right? I think we have over the last I'd say 2 or so decades have really doubled down on sustainability. It was really the Obama presidency, his first campaign, where he really pushed that as part of his pillars for his presidency. And around the same time as the hybrid cars started to become a thing. So what are we talking about? Like maybe mid-aughts or so. So this whole idea is not very old. And I feel like while we're still kind of forming these behaviors, which, Heather, you mentioned recycling, like I believe in the behavior of recycling more than the recycling itself, because we all know the system is not working how it should be. And uh, many crazy percentage, many of the things that we recycle actually don't get recycled. But the behavior is important, because once we then go upstream and reimagine the systems upstream to then provide us with the goods and services, products and services, experiences that we would like to have in our day-to-day lives, then we're actually like really moving the needle, so that we can continue with those behaviors of quote unquote recycling, but maybe we're doing it in a better way, a way that heals and renourishes the planet, going back to Devron's statement about regeneration, right? So sustainability, in my opinion, really flatlines where things are, which is good. We're not causing more damage, but if we look behind us to the damage that we've caused, we need to also do the work of healing and renourishing. Um, and so I think it's a both and. I think, in my opinion, I think perhaps the better play, 15, 20 years ago, would have been to actually start with regeneration, right? Or at least the idea of it, so that we can actually understand that we have caused damage and that we need to heal the damage while also sustaining where we are today. So it's not so much a one is better than the other. It's that we have to do it all at the same time. It just comes down to education, but also more importantly, we have to go upstream and really change the systems that create the things that we have in our daily lives, because we can only do so much as individuals. It's the people that have the power, the strings that really affect so much.
Definitely. I love that. And yeah, Brian, you have something to add to that?
Yeah, just to put it in perspective a little bit. When you said recycling, we're talking about plastic recycling, because that's really what it is our world is on plastic, and those don't get recycled because of the way that they're made. Aluminum, 75% of the aluminum is already recycled. So if we're looking for changes in you know, product make, we have to make them out of glass, which is infinitely recyclable. Aluminum, which we're using 75% again, first run, which means we're only producing 25% new aluminum. And cardboard is 91% recyclable. So we are recycling in certain things, but because our society leans so much on plastic, we're not recycling enough because everything's made out of plastic. So we have to like stop relying on plastic for one. I'm gonna drop a movie in here. It was the year the Earth changed. It was an Apple documentary. And if you just want to see what kind of impact you have on your daily life and how that affects the planet, just look by driving and just deciding to walk someplace and see how different the planet looked after the 1 year of COVID when everyone was inside and couldn't be outside. And that will just show you like, what does my everyday activities around what I'm doing in my neighborhood affect the planet? And it starts to settle in like, hey, well, maybe I could change this or change that. So again, I don't want to be like Mark and say, hey, don't recycle, because I think it's great to do that. But I think it's important to realize the things that we're consuming are unrecyclable. So that's what is the big issue to begin with. So it's about looking for alternatives and trying to find places like the Grove that has a lot of suppliers that use glass as opposed to plastic. People like Serena, who's been B Corp certified. Any business that's like that, they have rigid, really stringent certifications. You have to hit a 90% threshold or you don't get it. So they're very strict, and they definitely make sure that these people are doing things sustainable. So if you see that B Corp, go ahead and work with that business. That's kind of like the indicator, say, hey, work with me if you're worried about sustainability. So
Love that. And Rachel, I see you nodding in agreement. Were there some points from the documentary that Brian brought up that were kind of meaningful to you? Are you a fan of that documentary?
Yeah, I loved it. It was Richard Attenborough, and it was like, look, when people aren't, thinking of themselves and taking over every beach, every ocean, every square inch of this planet, like nature and life and animals can really flourish in such a short amount of time. Because yeah, I think that idea that like the earth will be fine, it's us that we're, trying to save here. And then also going back to, I'm putting it in the chat, going back to recycling. I mean, not to nitpick on recycling itself, but like it was started by the bottling companies to take the responsibility off of them and put it onto the consumers. And so I love the idea of pushing back, making them responsible, making fossil fuel companies responsible. And then I just posted the 7 R's of regeneration. Like there's so many steps that we can take before it even gets to that point of recycling. Like, I'm thirsty. Why can't I just bring a reusable bottle or drink out of a public water fountain like they have in every plaza in Italy, instead of having to just like constantly buy bottled water? And then that brings in a lot of climate justice issues. Like you have to get that bottle of water because you're in an impoverished area or an impoverished city that the government does not care that you don't have access to clean drinking water. So this is all you have. Like, I think keeping that lens in mind as well is important.
Definitely, definitely. And it seems like the alignment of reasoning throughout this conversation is that yes, the power is within the hands of the people, but it's also the businesses that need to take responsibility, but we as the people need to demand more transparency from them. It seems like a lot of, even as Rachel just mentioned with us recycling, a lot of that responsibility being pushed onto us. There's a lot of awareness that prefaces that could stop us from being at the point where we have to recycle so many things. If we were more informed about reusables or renewables, or just had those things built into our livelihoods. So Serena, if you don't mind, I would love to maybe delve into your expertise in working with larger corporations and kind of explore what we should be demanding from them in the form of transparency, and maybe even suggestions that you have as far as brands that we should advocate for or support more. Because even if we're not creatives, if we're interested in just making a positive impact, who we support, as your profile says, does say a lot about who we are. So.
Yeah, absolutely. First, I just wanted to go back to the recycling and like a beach cleanup. People are like, why would you do a beach cleanup? Like, what difference is that going to make? It's totally a gateway drug, guys. Gateway drug. Like, once I get you there and have you thinking about this, the next time you go to the store, you're going to be like, why is there all this plastic? And why can't I choose something else, that's not going to end up on that beach cleanup that I just, had to do. As far as corporations and transparency, there's so much greenwashing, and the cooler that, climate activism becomes, and the more it's front and center, the more and more greenwashing we see. It's just, a lot of people think that they're doing good. Others just are using it because they want that share of the market, right? I personally thought, I'm a sustainable business. I don't, I'm doing all of these things. And then I was like, oh, I'm going to become B Corp certified, because that's, I want to work with other B Corps. So you really do need to be a B Corp to work with other B Corps, because it cuts through all the BS. And I went to do that B impact assessment, and holy wow. That's when I realized how serious it was and what you had to do. And, these companies are doing everything from measuring their trash. In fact, that's the number one thing. Now, I went to one hotel not long ago, and they say they're a sustainable brand. And we were there with a sustainability director. And the first thing she did is walked us to the trash. Like, they weigh their trash. They know exactly how much is going out, recycling all their glass with a local company that's called Glass for Life. Things like that are just like, a hotel is doing that. There's a man sorting through the guest trash, because there are making machines that do this now, but it doesn't fit in the one in South Beach. So there is literally somebody that they hired that goes through the guest trash, because they can't make the guests recycle. They can recycle in the kitchen, they can recycle, but the guests just throw their trash, and a man sorts through it so that they can hit their mark on what trash that need to be recycled. That's the kind of transparency that I want from the corporations that I buy from. And I lean heavily on that B Corp certification just because I know how hard it is. And I know that even companies that sometimes come into question, like Nespresso is a certified B Corp. And all of the sort of little mom and pop coffee companies were very upset about it. Like, oh, how did you guys let them certify? Well, they did the work. They met the metrics. And we can't be like, no, not you guys, because we don't like you. If you do the work and you meet the metrics, you get in, like it's black and white. There are metrics there. They are evolving the standards. They are actually going to become more rigorous in the sense that they are going to also involve a lot more social aspects. Before you could kind of pick and choose, you could say, well, I'm just kind of like a social company and we want to make our impact here, or I'm just an environmental company and we want to make our impact here. And now they're making you hit all of the pillars. So there will be more fair pay, fair wages from companies that maybe were just green, and there will be more green initiatives from companies that were more fair wages and people impact.
I love that. And so, a question to the group as a whole: how do we, as individuals interested in creating a better future, how do we find more of this information? Because just since I've connected with Brian and Mark, I have been exposed to so many initiatives from these huge brands that, I'm not like a diehard fan, but I feel like I would have heard about, like Apple's, renewable plan, or IndyCar's like renewable tire experience, like big things that are making a huge difference on a massive scale, but it's not front forward because it's not what their demographic is, or maybe it's not sexy, or maybe ultimately it doesn't matter because as long as sales are up, it doesn't matter what's happening on the back end. So how do we vet not just big businesses, but like consumer level products and businesses? It's a question to any of you. I think everyone has unmute capabilities. Brian,
I would
yes.
say that it's not so easy. It's so straightforward, right? Because you don't know until you find out
Yeah.
what the repercussions are of what they're doing. Personally, that's why I like certifications. I, follow companies at 1% for the planet, that are B Corp certified, that have that fair trade. I lean heavily on certifications. As a branding person, I love them. They're little brands, right? And I've had good luck. Of course, that's, not black and white. And Apple has no certifications yet. They have a pretty good sustainability ranking. And you can always follow people that are digging into these things. In the fashion industry, there is a Alden Wicker just wrote a book called To Die For. And she is like an investigative reporter and goes into a lot of these companies and really gets into the nitty gritty and the technical stuff and sort of shares that with people on her blog. Also in that book. So I just say, look for people like that. And those certifications. That's from me. Love to hear what other people are doing.
Nice. Yes, Brian.
I second that. I go by certifications, 1% for the planet. Especially if they have an offset, I'm all about not just giving to an organization, but also giving to a Surfers Foundation and trying to help additional organizations as well. But as consumers, when we go to buy something, we go online, we check out like 15 reviews. Do two. Go to the company's website and go all the way to the bottom. And there's usually a sustainability page. Everyone's going to have one. Some of them will be like one page, and then some will be like Apple that have like 150 pages. And you can dive in and just read the page. And some of the pages are just, like Serena said, they just wash over. They're just trying to get the language right to make you think something's happening there and that they're a sustainable company. And there's other sites that are really robust, and you go into them. Google's got a few. All of the major tech companies have them to some degree, but I would say that stop just looking at reviews and actually go to these companies' websites and see how they're presenting themselves. Because that's one step. Another thing I would say is green shaming has prevented a lot of companies from projecting what they're doing rightfully because they're afraid of getting backlash from it. So it takes a lot of heat also on the consumers because we sometimes don't go to their sites, and we sometimes grade some of these, like even Serena said, Apple does a pretty decent job. And now, granted, are they perfect? No, but they're in the top 10% compared to other tech companies that I've spoken to and don't know anything about what's going on. So every time Apple announces something, people are like ringing on the alarms, going crazy. Oh, they're greenwashing. They're really not. What about the 5 or 6 companies you're working with every day that you haven't even questioned once? So it's about just looking at what you're doing and then like do a little bit of homework and find out how that company is presenting themselves to the public, and then make a real like informed decision. Say, hey, is this somebody that I really want to do business with? Does this page look legit? If it doesn't, maybe I need to find a new service or a new product. And there's several options out there. So that's kind of how I do my side of things.
Wait, is that a real thing? What did you call it? Green bashing? Are there really companies who lose portions of their audience? Do you have an
It's
example?
called green hushing.
Green hushing. Okay.
Yeah. It's where they are sustainable, but they're afraid of projecting it because of backlash. So they just don't say anything. But the reverse of that is the companies who don't want to do anything, they use that as a guise to say, hey, well, I don't have to do anything now. I don't have to tell anyone because no one wants this news. So the other thing I would say, I'm sorry to add on, Eric was real right. Getting out on the street. I was at Project Blue Sky with Rachel and Mark, and we actually had to go into the community. And I didn't know of like at least 3 really sustainable solutions that were going on in that town until I actually walked around and found out what was happening there. So it's about getting away from the computer a little bit, getting out into the planet, seeing some greenery, smelling hopefully some fresh air, and seeing what's going on in your neighborhood.
Yeah. I love that. And on that note, I would love to kind of open the conversation to Rachel, Mark, and Brian, and then we'll move back over to Eric to share his experience in education. We'll start with Mark, Rachel, and Brian, because being involved in community and seeing the real impact, being hands-on, and also being surrounded by individuals who are aligned with your goals and vision that's so important. You lead Project Blue Sky. I know that Brian was just there not too long ago. Can you all speak to the importance of community efforts like that, or things that make a real tangible difference that you can see and feel, and also just the power of community? And if not the benefit for us, just how it personally has impacted you since your experience?
Yeah. So as I mentioned in my intro, before focusing on climate, my work was centered around social impact, social innovation. So community-based projects, they were my jam, right? I was pretty nomadic for about 3.5 years all over the country and a little bit in Europe, just moving to places where I can, offer, my skills and services, partnering up with organizations on the ground. I think I want to make a quick note here, and then I'll get back to the question. Uh, how I think about climate change and our climate breakdown is that it is a symptom to something bigger, and the root of it, in my opinion, is the separation. It is separation. It's separation between us and others. So community, obviously, it's a separation between us and ourselves. It's separation between us and our environment, our natural world. It's it's something that we used to kind of live within, and over the last 100 or 200 years, we've developed systems that have kind of spliced and diced us away from certain things externally and internally. And so going back to your question, Devron, around community, it's so important to have a sense of who lives around you, for you to have a sense of what solutions and approaches around the issue of climate, or around the topic of climate action, what's actually going on in your backyard. As we know, our climate breakdown is going to be affecting every city, town, region differently. What's going to happen here in the Bay Area is going to look very different than those over in the UK or those in India. And so having a good understanding of not just the solutions and approaches in your backyard, but also who of your neighbors, of your community, are actually working on those solutions and approaches, and then figuring out how you can help, how you can support. And that can look like transitioning into working for that actual company. It can look like volunteer work. It can look like donating. It could look like a lot of things, as Brian and Eric were mentioning. But yes, I believe that we need to reconnect with those around us, because also, let's talk about this too. with these man-made disasters, floods, hurricanes, tornadoes, it's causing havoc in our worlds. And so when there are emergencies in our backyard, we have to come together and support each other. I've witnessed the path of a tornado after it went away, and it's so crazy how exact that is. One house can be completely flat and their neighbor is completely fine. It's insane. And so I bring that up only because it might not look like what you think, or it might not affect you personally, but it can affect someone across the street. It can affect someone across the town. But if you don't know those folks, and if you don't have that shared understanding of what it means to live in your community, if you don't know their special skills, and what they can provide in ways of help, then it's going to make for a longer road ahead when it comes to rebuilding and establishing community climate resilience.
Yeah, it's definitely very powerful. Rachel, do you have anything to add moving from the entertainment industry to the climate field? That's definitely a big shift, and just the value of finding a supportive network in your transition.
Ooh, sorry, my brain was around all the other topics we've been talking about. Yeah, so moving away from entertainment, I think the Hollywood Climate Summit is a great place to start. That's a lot of conversations about how our popular culture can shift what's considered normal, what's considered cool, like all behavioral change. And I would love to get more involved in organizations like that because, to be transparent, when I was working in-house at one of the huge studios out here, I was just like, we are only here to provide entertainment between commercial breaks, to sell shit to people that they don't need, to sit on their ass on the couch and ignore the world outside their TV screens. So trying to take like a more, I guess, positive look. People are going to keep watching TV, but I would love if they would be as excited and as passionate about nature and their environment and their community and talk about them and obsess about that the same way that they talk about their favorite, reality TV show. There is a group that has been part of Hollywood Climate Summit that we had the fortune to bring one of the speakers or one of the organizers from Good Energy to be one of our virtual speakers for Project Blue Sky. Good Energy works with all the different studios and writers to infuse climate stories into scripts. And I think one of the most powerful examples that he gave was how in the 80s, designated drivers weren't a thing. Like it was a thing that they were doing in Sweden. And so in one special episode of Family Ties with Michael J. Fox, he talked about, oh, you're drinking, I'm going to be the designated driver. And from that episode, it started the entire concept. It changed policy. It changed insurance. And it just changed like the cultural norm. So if we can have something as powerful around climate action, I think, that would be a great goal.
That's amazing. Thanks for sharing that example. That's a perfect testament to the importance of collecting diverse perspectives, because who would have known that that would have been the campaign that triggered so much change, when I'm sure there were people that were working just as hard on safety and precautions and longevity. So we really never know where that spark or that idea is going to come from. So it's our responsibility to spread education and awareness. This kind of ties into the question that we have from Laura. I'm going to ask that, and then I would love to move over to a little bit more about the importance of education from your perspective, Eric. I think it ties in to your experience and your expertise. Laura says that she is that there are, according to a US Census, 63.7 million Hispanics in the US, that she's a general contractor in the construction field and sees recyclable debris on a daily basis. What is the approach to teach our Latinos the importance of recycling? So, not just in the field of construction, but fundamentally, what do you see, Eric, are the things that are missing from like a base understanding of planet positive action? And what approaches do you think we can take to better educate on all levels?
Maybe I'll work backwards on that one. What I wrote in the chat for Laura involves community, which we've been talking about, and there's a lot of research into community through the world of psychology, in particular, in that if you are not a member of that community, it's much harder to make any changes in that community because you're not part of the community, right? So why are they going to listen to you? But if you are part of that community, it's a much different scenario. And so, in Laura's question, as a general contractor, she can be the boss in many of these situations. So leadership within that community, whether it be it really depends on the community, right? It could be someone of a person of faith, right? It could be the guy running the barber shop. It could be, in this case, the general contractor, where they will listen to those members of the community more so than someone outside of the community. So that it would be an important thing to consider in terms of like general education. I think it's really hard these days because we are bombarded with so much information constantly, right? That it's overwhelming, and you tend to tune out things, even if they are important, right? Like I won't get into politics, but there's so many things in politics happening that these are abnormal things. These are not things historically in the past 100 years that have been happening, yet they're happening and they're being normalized. And so you tend to feel apathetic about it, right? So I personally think the educational side of the world, from how nature works and how we are nature. We're not living in nature. We are natural organisms amongst other natural organisms, has to start in early in life, right? And that's a big overhaul. If you think about, where I am and at just one university and then one department within one university, it's like it takes years here to make any sort of major difference in a class or curriculum, because it has to go through so many checks and balances, and they are there for a reason. However, it's like steering the Titanic in another direction. So there's there's a lot of wicked problems involved in this. And but it just needs to happen earlier. And I think it takes, hey, if you're a parent, we know that Brian's a parent, that was mentioned earlier on, that, hey, you can begin with your kids, right? Because you don't know how this is going to happen in their education. And it's kind of a cop-out answer, but that it's a really big, wicked problem.
Yeah, thank you very much. It definitely is. And so, Serena, I would love to invite you to maybe share some of your expertise in the Tai Chi mentality. It's something that you're known for, but just that connection, that harmony. I would love to hear your thoughts on how a mindset and time spent in nature and just that connection and awareness and noticing can be the thing that does motivate you to action.
It's huge. The philosophy, well, I mean, and Eric just mentioned it, that we are nature. We're not living on this planet. We are part of the ecosystem. And I think that just spending time in nature, and unfortunately, in cities right now, people are so disconnected and we're so, addicted to these that we're forgetting everything else. We're just in our minds and not in our natural senses, which is exactly what Tai Chi does. It brings you back sort of, can I feel my body? Can I feel what my body is feeling and what is out there that isn't just in my mind? Um, and it's just doing like going on a hike does wonders. I mean, the science behind what it does to you, physically is there. I don't, I'm not BSing this. It lowers the cortisol levels. It, gives you endorphins. Like it's all there. It's science. If you go out and hug a tree, it's science. You're going to feel better. So how do we get people back into nature? How do we get them off their phones and back into nature? And once you're in nature and you see something you like and something attracts you, then you want to protect it. And that's why it's so huge for us to get, kids into the water and to see dolphins and to see, these in the wild, is to see animals in the wild. Because then they're going to want to protect them, to get people down there snorkeling or whatever it is that we need to do. Because people are kind of disconnected from the coast, even though the majority of people do live near the coast, to protect those things and the forests and how we evolved with them. And now that we're so disconnected, that's basically what's happening, is that we're letting them go to ruin because we no longer have that need to protect them. So, and how do we do that? I mean, I do it with my own kids. I do it with myself. I encourage it. I'm asking other people to do it and just getting the word out there. And it goes back to, is this in our main, conversation? And how do we get it back there?
100%. That is the connection. Connection is the thing that is missing. And it's interesting because throughout this conversation, those are the things that all of the professionals have touched on, that we are living in a world of digital addiction instead of being in touch with nature, that we are, as Eric said, tuning out the important things, that there is a lack of awareness. So with all of these things stacked against us, what do we do? I know that, Eric, very interesting thing about you. Maybe this is something that we can invite you and Mark to share your contrasting visions, because Eric, you write post-apocalyptic stories that foretell the destruction and the potential chaos that could be a reality if we don't take action. Those things seem far-fetched, but that could be a reality. I know that, Mark, the last time we talked to you, you talked about your doom and bloom concept, that we need to be aware of the realities that we're facing, but it can't all be disheartening. So I'd love to explore maybe both of those concepts, and then just the reality of, with the cards stacked against us, how do we take action if we're just a person somewhere all by ourselves that wants to do something and we don't have any support as it stands?
Well, Mark changed me. I don't write about zombie apocalypses anymore, so that I did, and I tend to now lean more into, as you said, doom and bloom. So that, I think, that's good. That's positive. There's no point in dwelling in the. I think there was a quote about living in this particular era and trying to move forward into a better, greener future. We don't want to bring that negativity with us. We want to learn from it, but we want to leave some of the zombies in the past. But your second question is a great one, and it's what I've been exploring a lot since 2017. And what I've had to teach myself to do is think more in systems, right? How is everything connected? Because once you start to see how things are connected, and some things are connected more to other things, they're not all equally connected. And I've sort of eliminated the word solution from that world and thought about it from interventions into different systems that you can see how even little things, you're stuck at home with a broken leg and you want to do something positive for climate action. Well, you still can, right? And you can recognize that by looking at the bigger picture, but also the details at the same time. The best sort of visual example of that is Charles and Ray Eames' Power of 10 film that you can find on YouTube for free, but they zoom out into the universe and zoom into the human body, right? And we see how even at a microscopic level, it looks like the universe and how all of this is connected. So training yourself to be a systems thinker is very opposite of how you were taught in primary school. So it is kind of a chore, but I have been writing and teaching this to designers with some luck. However, it is still a work in progress, but I feel like it's a necessary thing because nature works cyclically and we do not, from the standpoint of our economy, as Serena has pointed out, and well, a lot of you, Brian, too, with recycling, that it's not, even recycling is not cyclical unless it's a metal. Paper can be recycled 7 times, for instance. So from a very small perspective, vote. I mean, that's something you got to do. Even slacktivism is fine, like signing petitions to your senator. But for this year, I think I'm just going to recommend people go vote.
Yeah, that is such an important thing, and it goes beyond nationally and your community and your state, your township. There's so many opportunities to take action, and even if the result isn't in your favor, it's a much better feeling to know that you did something that was within your power. So, Mark, in contrast, the doom and bloom approach, because in business, if we're selling a product or service, an immediate sell comes from someone that's in an emergency situation that needs their demand met right then and there. Otherwise, we've got to nurture them. We've got to bring them in. We've got to get them acquainted with us. And it's usually outcome-based services and products that result in a sell. It's the picture of what this can do for you. So do you find that the Bloom approach, how action can change your life immediately or the things that are around you, your daily experiences, do you find that to be a more motivating approach for creatives and for business owners?
I think it depends on what we're talking about. I think perhaps some of those offerings, whether they be a product, service, or experience, can lend itself well to that kind of that immediate emergency kind of situation that you described. I think others, it's more the long game. Yeah, I feel like it just depends on what happens after that purchase, right? Or what happens after that initial experience? What's the long-term engagement? And if we can think about it that way, then I think keeping people's attention on the work that you're doing as a company, how you are supporting their lives, how you're healing the planet, all these things matter, even going beyond that initial purchase or experience. So I think for companies today, they gotta really double down on thinking about going beyond that initial point of sale and how they're showing up and how their employees are showing up and the impact that they're having both before the thing, all the touch points and all the uh, uh, various extractions and shipping and transportation, all the things that it brings the thing to that person. I really don't like to use the word consumer, so I'm using person in this scenario. And then the impact after that, the behavioral impact, the societal impact. So it's a whole gamut, right? It's not just, hey, let's just get this person to buy the thing or to do the thing and then wash your hands off of it and go on to the next person. So I feel like companies really need to double down on figuring out what all that looks like so that their people, their audience, their intended audience are able to create that positive future that we're talking about, right? That bloom part. And I want to go back quickly to Eric's comment too. Everything is connected. I think many of us know that. The reason why I say doom and bloom, the doom part is still part of that conversation. And I think it is important to have a little bit of that flavor in this conversation. I just watched a great video the other night. I'll put it in the chat here from a really fun YouTube channel called Practical Engineering. A little dorky and nerdy, but this title of this video is "How Long Will Society Last During a Total Grid Collapse?" And talk about systems thinking, right? He took this one scenario and he used storytelling to put the viewer of his video into, you live in a city, your power goes out. The first night it's kind of fun, you're like camping. And then 3 days in, you're just like, okay, this is kind of getting old. And then you start to see the effects of it. You can't flush your toilets, you can't use a sink, you can't do this. And he's showing that everything in our modern lives is powered by electricity. So I think we need those types of doom stories or situations to really make sure that people are aware of how we live today. And then don't just stop there, and then provide them with that second part of that conversation. How do we actually then go from how everything in life is connected to our aging power grid to, hey, here's what life could look like if we were to actually get ahead of and rethink and reimagine our power grid, maybe more at the local level, obviously at the renewable level. So you still kind of need that little flavor of doom in there because it tells people what's going on today and the imperfections and the rough spots and the cracks in our systems. But more importantly, we need to have that part two conversation in there as well. Don't leave these folks hanging. We've been doing that since the beginning of the environmental movement. And as amazing as a lot of those trailblazers before us laid the groundwork, I think most of what they were doing didn't have that part two of that conversation. And so this is our opportunity as designers to help people see what's possible, to fill that imagination gap.
I love that. And that ties into raising awareness, exposure, being aware of what exists, and that ties into your network and your community. Because there's so many different ways to approach things. When I think of the example that you just offered, Mark, about how it gets more detrimental as life goes on, and without electricity, you start to realize by day 2 or 3 how many things you're connected to. That's a despair situation for a lot of us. But as a creative, I think if I was talking to a minimalist or someone interested in the survival type of lifestyle, that's like a win for them. That's an interesting thing. That's an educational tutorial. That's something that they might want to go out and experience. I see that we're drawing pretty close to our timeline. I know that we've got you all until about 4:30. The ultimate goal of this conversation was to find alignment in thinking and to hopefully end up with some sort of creative brief or direction that we can take out into the real world, that we can use in our individual communities, that we can analyze and then maybe reconvene on later, but just something that is real, that is meaningful, and that would have impact if it was put out into the world. I believe that the common threads were, as we mentioned just a few moments ago, that we do live in a world where people tune out to the important things if they're not immediate, that there is a separation, that there is an addiction, and it's not to positive things, it's to distraction. So throughout your experiences or throughout your journeys, are there any campaigns, any concepts, any ideas that you think just deserve a lot more attention than they're getting? Is there something that is personally important to you that you haven't shared or brought to a community setting that you think would have broad application and be really, really powerful if it was put out into the world? Yeah, Brian.
This kind of keys into what we've been discussing for the last 5 or 10 minutes, and it started with Laura's question. When you mentioned about trying to teach our Latinos how to be more sustainable, I'm half Puerto Rican, so I come from the community. A lot of times, minorities are sustainable people. Unfortunately, we're going to start talking about a little bit of politics. I don't mind getting into that. Social aspects, talking about Climify. When you had Wawa on, she was talking about how you know, communities of color live pretty sustainably right now because there's just things that they have to do to make ends meet or to, kind of make money here or stretch things. So they sort of already live sustainably. And then when we look at who lives the most sustainable, they're indigenous peoples, also minorities. So all of that to say, honestly, in a world where we want things immediately, we want our problems fixed immediately, we need the job done yesterday, we actually, the world's burning, but we need to like slow down, and it sounds kind of like antithetical, but when you go out and you become one with nature, your brain slows down and you actually mellow out and you can hear yourself. If we're not giving our constructive guys enough time to sift through things to actually recycle them, guess what? Those guys aren't going to recycle anything because you need to get those houses done. So because you're rushed for time, they don't have the time to be able to, you know, conserve what it is that they could actually reuse and then reuse it in a proper way, because you just got to get the framing done. We got to get the 10 houses on the block and we got to get these people in their houses because everybody wants everything yesterday. So if we just slow down a little bit, we started asking questions as to why systems are set up the way that they are, we start thinking a little bit differently, we can start approaching some of these problems with different actions. I like not using the word solutions because none of these are solutions. These are just half stops. And we're never going to get fully there. And you have to be okay with that. But we have to like continue building on a bunch of half stops so that it makes enough of a difference. So yeah, I would say just slow down, stop worrying about, get to your client and say, look, I'm going to get it to you next week. You're not going to get it tomorrow. All right. I'm going to take a couple more minutes to look at things. I want to make sure all my images or whatever's, the best, the smallest file size so that we could get this really, really, really minute. And if you're not giving yourself the time to actually like analyze what you've put out there, well, then you can't really improve on it. You know what I mean? So I think that's a big basis. Like give people the time to actually come up with the proper actions and solutions that they want to provide, as opposed to, hey, this is what we as a society have deemed what we need, and that's what you need to work within. And I think when we start getting out of that mindset, we can start actually getting better solutions on a quicker basis because we're actually giving people that creative freedom.
It's definitely powerful. Is there anything else to add, Rachel, Eric, Mark, Serena, just from an educational standpoint or from businesses, creatives, individuals that you've connected with, just little barriers that exist that if a little more attention was paid to them, it would make such a huge difference in the outcome?
Yeah, I just wanted to bounce off what Brian was saying about slowing down and the idea about degrowth as well. Like we need to not just, again, putting it all on consumers for consuming so much, but on those companies for overproducing so much that humans aren't even buying it and it's winding up in a landfill in South America. Yeah, I think our metric, capitalism, bottom line, we all know that. Like our metrics of success are all off. Like we do not need to constantly be doing things faster, bigger, endless growth on a planet of finite resources. And the idea of thinking of time as one of our most valuable resources too. It's not just the materials we use, but it's the amount of time that we give people to be with themselves, be with their family, be with nature, be doing literally anything besides staring at their computer or working their asses off day in, day out, so that they don't have the luxury of time to sit back and reflect and think about the things that matter to them in life.
Yeah, that is so important. A little bit of time to yourself will give you a time for reflection and to make some critical adjustments. But yeah, oftentimes a lot of us are living a life that's so rushed. Um, Eric, Serena, anything to add to that?
I'm space, and that's what she was just saying. Space is huge. Also in not just in our mind, in our life, in our work, in our consumption. Like, do we need everything that we have? And I'm not coming, like, I'm not a minimalist in the sense that you usually have one t-shirt. But maybe instead of, what's the average? I think is like some people buy 65 articles of clothing a year. It's some ridiculous number. Like, do you really need 65? 65. I'm sure you would be fine with 10. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about our consumption, and let's talk about the overproduction from the companies. And we are in a system that's what it feeds. So how do we change the conversation? How do we stop saying that, it's not cool to own 64 shirts in 1 year? Like, that's just not cool. So how do we change that? And I think we do that through media, right? TV shows.
Yeah, that's true. Digital experiences, they have so much power, and just the way that things are presented, it's not a negative for a minimalist. A little fashion series on how to make 10 pieces of clothing go the distance is really appealing. Eric, anything to
Um, yeah, I think the thing that I try to do is, and it's if you can do it, I try to financially support groups that are doing things that, I don't really know how to do. A good organization that, they're going to be on my show later on this year. It's called Groundswell, and they are fantastic. I think it's public knowledge that they just got a pretty major grant from the Inflation Reduction Act to be adding, solar for free on Black and Latino homes in Mississippi, Louisiana, Alabama, where it's literally going to change those people's lives, right? Their $150, $200 energy bill is gone.
Wow.
And they have that much money per month, right? So that organization needs support. They just got a good, healthy grant, but I always encourage people, if you can, give to some of these other groups who are doing really, really good work that, goes unseen.
Are there any characteristics of a group that, in the form of transparency, make it really attractive? Like, what should we be looking for in terms of activity and results, or just updates? Like, if you're a really active organization, are you updating your community a couple times a month, once a month, quarterly, or?
Yeah, there's a really good website, and it's escaping my brain at the moment, which rates nonprofits in terms of, how much money is going towards, paying senior administration versus like actually going to the people in need. Charity Navigator just
Awesome.
popped up in the chat, so that might be the one I'm thinking about. There might be others too, but I use that to pick the groups that I give to, because there's a lot of overhead, in some organizations, and it doesn't. I think there was, if you remember back in like, forget which catastrophe it was, probably in Haiti, where like American Red Cross, like such pitifully low amount was actually getting to Haiti I don't want to disparage the American Red Cross if that was the wrong group, but I think it was. There was just not the funds getting to where they claimed it was going. So that's how I find who to give to is through these. I'm not going to call them certification, but they are kind of independent third-party monitoring services.
Yeah, no, thank you definitely, Eric, Serena, and Rachel for sharing the supporting websites, associations, because that transparency, it is something that has put a lot of people off. Like, people have been burned once or twice before, or see that their funds are being mismanaged, and that one interaction will throw you off of supporting a charity or an organization or initiative that is worth it. So, due to time constraints, I don't think that we're going to be able to actually make it to the ideation part of crafting a defined brief, which is okay. I had several people tell me that we probably wouldn't, and that's okay. But I still would love to listen. True's laughing at me. It was True. True was the one that told me I wouldn't have time for that. So, but no. So I would love to invite Heather, True, if there are any questions for our creators, and then I would love to just have a quick roundtable to define, maybe in your idea, what are like one or two little things that people can do to take action today. Because in looking at the common thread that kind of ties in all of the responses, it comes down to take a little more time, make a way bigger difference. And that's across the board. So I would love to know from your personal perspectives what things we could take a little more time on that would make a difference. But first, I'd like to wrap up the exploratory part of the conversation with Heather and True when she's finished laughing at me, if there are any additional questions.
I'm done. I'm done laughing.
Okay.
I'll defer my laughter until after
the
group. That's fine. Actually, I don't think what I have is really a question, but it was just something that came up for me when you were discussing about how certain groups are already kind of innately sustainable. And it just made me think about a little bit about my personal experience about like how I grew up. And that's exactly the dynamic that we had. And I think that I've kind of taken that same, we got to save this, we got to scrape the last little bit of stuff out of a jar, you know what I mean? Like into my adult life. But in thinking about that, it feels more like from a place of scarcity than responsibility. So again, there's no real question there, but it's just something that came up for me. And I don't know whether or not if this is something that's presented to another group, like, is there a way to make that the optic of it being a kind of a in crisis, you're not going to get more of this if you run out of kind of like, I don't know. Again, no real question, but it just seems like there's something that maybe can make it feel a little bit better and get more people involved in sustainable practices as the practice and not out of some kind of coercion. If that makes any sense. But that's just something that came up for me that I was kind of interested in tapping a little deeper into.
Yeah, that definitely is a true statement. I talked to a couple seasons ago a woman in the fashion world named Akila Stewart, who's Haitian, and she was telling me, the word sustainability is at least in how we work with it and define it, is very much a white male business term co-opted from indigenous practices, in that her family, her culture, her people in Haiti were living in a very sustainable way, and that still resonates with how she lives her life now, even though she's got wealth, right, and some sort of fame. But I remember, I don't know how to translate this into more action like you asked, but I remember a friend of mine who I went to grad school with from India, and he was talking about how when he was done painting, right, and he had a big paint can, that paint can was reused for water, rinsed out, used for water. And when it couldn't carry water anymore, they flattened it and made it a roof tile for their house, right? So some of it has to do with socioeconomics and just, hey, you have to do something. So I think you're onto something really important there. And like, how do we translate that into more popular culture and how we are living as opposed to not really?
That actually brings me to my question, which was something that Davron had been thinking about too, is that word sustainability, and how do we rebrand um, sustainability and make it something that's more inclusive and for everybody. And Rachel, I also see your hand up there. So maybe you could, if you still want to, maybe you could take this question, but just the terminology we use, is it time that we change the way we talk about it?
I think that's a good question for Mark, actually. He has like a whole presentation about sustainability versus regeneration. Putting you on the spot.
Well, no, we're at the end of there's a whole other presentation, but yes, I'll just quickly respond, Heather, and to True as well for bringing up a really important perspective. The way that I see it is, how do we just make what it is that we're talking about just the default? And instead of the additional thing, like I was talking to a woman this morning actually on Zoom, and she was telling me about her client, and they want to make sure that they have this sustainability section on the homepage because they feel it's important. So I was asking her about it, and it's like, yeah, they have this little thing here, but it's not really part of their DNA. And it's another example of how companies just see it as the additional thing just to kind of check off that box so that they can kind of wipe their hands away or off and walk away from the work that actually really needs to be done. And so how do we make this work just default? Like how a lot of these communities in various places around the world at various times in our history, how we used to live. A lot of what we're talking about and the dangers that we're facing have only really been around for a couple hundred years, and that's a blimp in the grand scheme of things in the human history timeline, right? And so it's not unheard of for us to kind of go back to how things used to be in a balanced, thriving, flourishing way. I think we just kind of have to come to terms with it might look different, and that's okay. We're not going back to caves, right? But I think we just need to really understand the bigger picture of why it is we're taking action and what the consequences are if we don't. And again, that's that separation, right? Where we have to reconnect with community, reconnect with our natural world, and reconnect with ourselves. Because we're being told various narratives that we have to live certain ways only because, and this is not what we're told, only because it benefits the powers that be upstream to put more money in their business, right? Put more money in their accounts, in their pockets. So I think, and this is what makes this whole thing so much of a clusterfuck, is that there isn't one simple solution. And I agree, I try to not use that word as well, or at least I try to attach it to approaches. I think I got that from Carol, no, Internet Carol from Creative Reaction Labs. If you don't know her, definitely check her out. So yeah, how do we yeah, I'm trying not to go down this rabbit hole. There's a lot more to it, and I know we're at time, but yeah, how do we just make this just easy and just default, and it's just normal? And we have history of that, so it's not too far off of a dream. I think it's just we have to get through the noise of just certain areas of our lives that are making it distracting or that are preventing us from actually doing that and achieving the lifestyles that we actually should have, that benefits health, safety, security above all, right?
Man, I really appreciate you putting him on the spot, Rachel. Mark, I can tell how passionate you are about this subject. I'm really excited to hear more about it because that is true. It would be amazing to view this as this is the default. This is just how we wake up. This is what we do. This is how we live, instead of an added responsibility or burden. So it's a beautiful approach. So yes, as we're coming to time, we've got about 5 minutes left. So I would love to give everyone 30 seconds or so to just reiterate a couple small adjustments, small steps that we can take. It doesn't matter if it's in a personal or professional life, if it's reconnecting with something, if it's in our processes. And then I still would love to follow through on our promise to have a creative brief at the end of this episode. I think that with all of the information we've covered today, we can have 2 or 3 paths that will allow for some personalization. I'm actually really excited to do a little concept exploration on a couple of these ideas. So we'll make sure that we have something out quickly. Brian, I'll start. You're on the bottom of my screen. I don't know if it's the same for everyone else, but I'll let you tune in, and just a couple small steps that you would offer as words of advice or that have made a big difference in your life.
Just start. That's really it. I think really what did it for me was starting and then trying to do kind of a how sustainable am I, like my own B Corp version for what I thought. I realized I was actually living way more sustainably than I had already thought, and then realized that some of the other moves I needed to make weren't that hard. So I think that's part of it. Is just start small, start wherever you think you can, show other people, ask questions. It doesn't have to be something big. I put in the chats about Dancing Man. Be first followers. We need to start those people who join us, and they're the ones who get everybody else comfortable with this type of lifestyle. Because then those first 2 people that join you, everyone else is like, oh, now I can dance. So be that first dancer. Don't be afraid of that. And go out there and just show people, hey, I'm still here, I'm around you, and I'm living completely different than you are, and we're in the same city, and I look as healthy as you do. And when you show people that stuff, then they're like, oh, well, maybe it's not as hard as I thought it was, or it's not as bad as this guy can do it, I can too. That's what I would say.
Love that. Get started and lead by example. Awesome. Serena?
I would start with getting out into nature. Like if you're not in doing that, start there. And if you are and you love nature and obviously you want to protect it, just question everything. Look at what you're doing, look at what you're buying, look at what you're working with. I think that was the real big wake up call for me, is using my talents to create really gross stuff in the world. And I know that not everybody can just walk away from their job because, they're using their talents for evil. But find an exit strategy. Like, it feels a lot better to create stuff that you believe in and that is having a positive ripple effect in the world. And as, creatives, it's huge. It's huge. And there's no reason that you should feel terrible about what you create. So find an exit strategy. Look at B Corps. Any business that is kind of walking the talk, and see if you can help those people, make those people your clients.
I appreciate that. And yeah, we've got some amazing guidance from our creators and leaders today as to who we should approach. So definitely actionable at the conclusion of this. Mark?
I'll share 2 things. I think one of them I shared during my recording with you, Devron. I love promoting the climate action Venn diagram. It was popularized by Dr. Ayanna Elizabeth Johnson a couple years ago. I'll put the link here. Super simple. What are you good at? What does the world need? And what brings you joy? It's kind of inspired by the Ikigai diagram as well. Because there's so much to do. And for those who are just starting, they're at mile 0, they see the trailhead ahead of them, and they want to take that first step. Oftentimes, they just don't know where to put that energy. So having this really simple framework allows that person to, at least for now, it can change 6 months from now or a year from now, whatever. At least it's a direction, right? Because the worst thing that can happen is that when someone who is just about to enter the space and learn all the things, which ties in my second point, I'll get in a minute, when they start to really see what's happening and all the things that need to be done, they can feel so overwhelmed that they don't do anything. And that's the last thing we need. right? So I love this little 3-circle Venn diagram. It's such a simple yet powerful tool. The second thing, real quick, is just start learning. Like YouTube University, I went there, like just Google stuff in your browser or whatever. Like, don't be afraid to ask dumb questions. Here's the thing, humanity has never experienced anything like this before. We are all learning. I don't like the word expert. I feel like we haven't lived a human history like this before to really learn from the previous time. And so I believe that we need to enter this through a beginner's mindset. Even if you are at mile zero, you still have years of experience, you have certain skills, you have history, you have family, you have memories, you have thoughts, ideas. What can you bring? What from all of that can you bring to this new journey that you're taking? So search online, YouTube University. It's really just YouTube. I say that. Some people think like, what? YouTube has a university? It's just YouTube. Ask people, like I said earlier on, like look into local solutions and approaches and interventions that are happening in your community. Just be a sponge, and it's okay to say, oh, I don't know that. Tell me more. Or it's okay to say that I don't understand. We're all learning this as we go. Um, I think we just need to really approach it through a beginner's mindset. And even when you're well off that journey, onto that journey like I am, I still watch Climate 101 videos. I'm still learning, right? So I think we just really have to embrace that learning journey as we step forward into this crazy time that we're living in.
Love that. Yes. Stay a student in the journey. Rachel.
So many things, trying to narrow it down. I think the first thing that I will say, just because I've been thinking about Dr. Reverend Lawson, who passed away last week. I had attended a lot of his nonviolence workshops when people started wanting to get involved after Trump was elected. And I think the best thing that he said is everybody is so full of passion. You don't need to go out and start your own thing. Like, go work with the people on the ground, grassroots, been doing this for decades, and learn from them and support them. Just get out there. There's so many organizations already doing this work. And then the other thing is, don't be a perfectionist. Like, leave the binaries behind. You don't have to do all or nothing. I think that a lot of people think that if they can't do everything perfectly, they won't do anything at all. Perfectionism is just holding back progress. So, like everybody else has been saying, just go out there, get involved, and just start doing the work.
That's amazing. And Eric, finally.
Yeah, if you untangle all these systems at work, one of the key contributors to our problem is the energy that we use to manufacture and go places, and that is through fossil fuels. So a lot of positive things can happen once that is remedied in baby steps or big steps. So my advice after learning a lot of this from the climate scientists I talk with is that personally going renewable, right? Not everyone can have solar panels on their house because they can't afford it, or like me, there's too much shade. However, and I'll put this in the chat here, there are in the US 22 states that have community solar policies, and including Washington, D.C. You can find out more at energy.gov. There's a lot of other great resources for that. Personally, that's what I do. I actually had a company come out and look at my roof to put solar on. They said, hey, it's just not going to be worth it for you. You have too much shade. I'm not cutting down all these trees. And they said, but invest in the community solar project. I live in Illinois. Illinois is one of the fastest growing community solar states, which makes me happy. So they're around, and you're basically then getting your energy from solar projects that are happening and funding new ones.
That's amazing. So, a culmination of get started, get involved, and always be learning. These have been some extremely powerful perspectives to analyze. I really appreciate you all coming together. I would love to continue this conversation, and I think that the themes that we have of how we can start to tune in to things that are in front of us and that are important right now, and how we can take a little more time to make a big difference, will be really fun to explore from an aesthetic and copywriting perspective. So maybe that's something we can open up a conversation about at the end. I'd love to put something out and yeah, just see all the different takes and perspectives on what that would look like if it was launched out into the world. So to all of our guests joining us today, we really appreciate it. I know this was a little bit longer than we normally run, but we're glad you stuck around for the journey. And to all of our guests, thank you so much. I know that this was a short notice thing. I apologize. I was a little absent during the communication stage of this, but you all were troopers, and I think that it went beautifully. So thank you again. Looking forward to following up with you all soon. And I think with that, we will end the recorded portion of the podcast.